think the actual like original title for this talk used like way too many buzzwords, so I tended to like simplify it a little bit. So what we're really going to be talking about today is a way to develop online games using kind of like a lazy way to do it, using a bunch of like low-code tools. And to provide a little bit of context, so I have been kind of like recently getting a little bit obsessed with seeing if there's ways to make social apps a little bit more kind of like playful and enjoyable to use. And in that process, I ended up discovering all these kind of like eclectic tools that people have been using to build, just like web apps, things like that, and also a bunch of like 3D game engines. And in this kind of like a random like experimentation, I found out a couple of ways to kind of like combine the two together, where you could almost create like a typical like CRUD app, like an app that lets you create, read, update, delete records, but uses almost like a 3D layer to just make the interactivity within the app a little bit more interesting. And I'll show some examples of like exactly like what I mean, but two tools that really kind of like stood out like through this exploration, in case the folks on this chat today have not heard of them. So from a game engine perspective, I started really falling in love with a tool called Play Canvas, which kind of like looks like pretty similar to like the typical like Unity, Unreal, things like that. But what makes Play Canvas kind of special is that it's really optimized for deploying web games, which means that the actual like game as it's kind of compiled and exported is like 30 times smaller than like a typical like bloated size out of Unity. So that just makes it like really, really load fast, especially when people access a web game through their like mobile phone browser. And then on the web development side, I've really been loving a tool called Bubble, which is almost like a full stack like web development tool. So it really has kind of like everything that you would expect like to build a web app, right? So it has like front end, it has a database, it has a workflow that connects all the two together. It lets you like inject custom HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code, and of course it's like online hosting. So I'm not sure how nerdy to get into this slide here. So maybe I'll just like cover it on like a really like surface level. And like if people have any questions, like super happy to like go into the specific logic. But really, what I uncovered in trying to piece together, rather integrate Bubble and Play Canvas is that I found that there's a way that you can deploy your app on Bubble and then build your 3D layer inside of Play Canvas, and then embed Play Canvas inside of Bubble, and then use a JavaScript method called postMessage to send data payloads between those two windows. And I know that's kind of like a little bit of a word spaghetti. So I'm gonna show you like an example of like specifically like what I mean. So here's like a really, really simple like use case from an app that I'm building today. So in this particular use case, I have this flow that's basically when the player entity collides with the NPC entity, then it should show a pop-up. And the way that the logic works, like within this kind of like Frankenstein integration, so I have inside of Play Canvas, I have a player controller that's listening for just like player input, right? So like mouse or touch events. And when it detects like a mouse event, then it moves the player entity towards the direction of the cursor. Then I have like an event that's listening for collisions, right? So when the player entity when the player entity's collision volume enters the NPC entity's collision volume, it fires this Play Canvas. It fires this post message that basically sends two critical pieces of information into Bubble. So what it does is it sends a string that's kind of like, hey, here's like the specific event that happened, in which case it's kind of this like PC dash like NPC bumped. And then it sends the unique ID that's associated to that NPC entity that was collided with. And then inside of Bubble, which is kind of what this like bottom portion of the slide is talking about, inside of Bubble, I have an event listener that's just like constantly listening to like what's coming into that post message payload. And when it detects a particular string, it fires like a bunch of it like triggers a couple of things to happen. It specifically triggers a query to be done against the database to figure out which message is associated to that NPC's ID. So it queries that like message table, and then if it finds a message, then it displays that message content inside of the like pop-up that also gets toggled to display. Okay, so why is this cool? Well, uh, um, I think it's kind of cool for like a couple of reasons. So the more that I have been kind of like diving into this like weird online game use case, I have started realizing that a lot of the social apps that or just like a lot of like the apps that are like built today, like they're kind of like online single player apps, right? So like irrespective if it's something like Reddit or Airbnb or Tinder, um, it's just like a really typical CRUD app, which is something that these no-code tools like Bubble let you clone extremely easily. However, I think like a really weird or unique opportunity is that all these apps that are like super popular and like used by like millions and millions of people like every single week, uh, they use a lot of design patterns that are like pretty archaic, right? Like all these like infinite scrolling like feeds have been around for like over 10 years now. So it almost feels like there's an opportunity to start making these like single player online apps a little bit more interactive, like using these kind of like 3D mechanics. And yeah, like if anybody wants to go down that avenue, then yeah, these tools like Play Canvas and Bubble can be like a way to kind of like get started like somewhat easily. So that brings me to the end of my talk. Happy to go into like the specifics of like any of the stuff that I covered. I'm actually like trying to implement like the same stuff that I talked about today into my own app. So I'm trying to create this kind of like messaging platform for neighborhoods that use 3D mechanics to kind of like encourage the sort of behavior that you might expect to display if you're like attending some sort of like a house party like in real life. And yeah, happy to like answer any questions and or get like super nerdy and specific about like the architecture.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hey.
Have you looked into deployment? I'm curious about costs.
Yeah. So the costs are extremely low. Um, so a lot of these what makes a lot of these like low code and no code tools so interesting is that they charge you on the basis of usage, which means that like right now I'm basically paying for like both Play Canvas and Bubble. I'm paying $50 a month just to like have them deployed. And I think that cost like remains like relatively like double or triple digits like into like the hundreds and thousands of users. So from a cost perspective, it's like unusually affordable.
Okay.
Oh, Angela, there's no
Yep.
further questions. Happy to pass it.
I'm checking the Twitch chat real quick. Looks like we don't have any. So thank you very much. And
Thank you.